The sound of clicking heels echoed through the grand hallway of Kingston Enterprises, a towering symbol of wealth and power in the heart of the city. Emma Carter, a dedicated and efficient secretary, moved swiftly toward her boss's office, clutching a stack of neatly organized files. She had worked here for 3 years, long enough to understand the unspoken rules of the office, especially when it came to dealing with the man behind the glass doors, Adrian Kingston. Adrian was a self-made millionaire known for his ruthless business strategies and cold demeanor. He was brilliant, calculated, and unforgiving. Employees feared him. Competitors envied him. But Emma, she had learned to survive under his impossible standards. "You're late." Adrian's deep, authoritative voice cut through the silence before. Emma could even set the files on his desk. She glanced at the clock. It was exactly 8 a.m., not a second over. But arguing was pointless. "I apologize, Mr. Kingston. Here are the reports you requested." Adrian didn't even look at her. He simply reached for the files, flipping through the pages with the same level of detachment he had toward people. "This formatting is wrong. Do it again," he said dismissively. Emma took a slow breath, suppressing the frustration that had become second nature. "I'll fix it right away." She turned to leave, but before she could take a step, his voice stopped her again. "And bring me a coffee. No sugar." "Of course, Mr. Kingston," she replied, her voice steady, though inside she was tired. Tired of his arrogance, tired of his indifference, but most of all tired of being treated like she was invisible. What Adrian didn't know, what he never bothered to notice, was that Emma wasn't just another employee. She had a quiet strength, a fire inside her that refused to be dimmed by his coldness, and soon he would realize that she wasn't just another name on his payroll, because fate had a strange way of turning the tables. And when it did, Adrian Kingston, the man who never cared for anyone, would find himself facing an unfamiliar emotion, love. But by the time he realized it, would it be too late? Emma carried out her tasks with quiet precision, knowing there was no room for mistakes. Adrian Kingston didn't tolerate errors, and he certainly didn't waste time on pleasantries. To him, employees were tools, efficient when needed, disposable when not. She had seen it happen to others. One slip-up, one missed deadline, and they were gone, replaced without a second thought. Yet, despite his relentless nature, Emma stayed. Not because she admired him, but because she had no choice. She had bills to pay, a younger brother to support, and dreams she had put on hold for the sake of responsibility. Working under Adrian Kingston wasn't easy, but it was necessary. That day, as she placed his coffee on the desk and turned to leave, Adrian finally looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in years. It wasn't intentional. His gaze had simply lingered a second longer than usual. There was something about her quiet resilience that unsettled him, though he couldn't quite place why. But just as quickly as the moment came, he dismissed it. She was just his secretary, nothing more, but fate had other plans. The next few weeks passed in their usual rhythm, Emma working tirelessly, Adrian barely acknowledging her beyond work. However, something began to shift. It was subtle at first, almost unnoticeable. He found himself catching glimpses of her when she wasn't looking, overhearing the way she spoke to colleagues with kindness, seeing the way she carried herself with quiet strength. One evening, long after most employees had left, Emma was still at her desk finishing a report. The office was silent except for the soft clatter of her keyboard. Adrian stepped out of his office, expecting to see an empty floor. Instead, he found her there, forehead creased in focus, fingers moving swiftly over the keys. "You're still here?" His voice broke the silence. Emma looked up, slightly startled. Just finishing the quarterly analysis. You needed it first thing in the morning. He frowned. You could have left it for tomorrow. She gave a small, tired smile. You don't like delays. Adrian wasn't sure why, but something about her answer made his chest tighten. There was no bitterness in her tone, no resentment, just a quiet understanding of how things worked, how he worked. For the first time in years, he felt a flicker of something unfamiliar. But before he could dwell on it, reality snapped back into place. He couldn't afford distractions. And Emma Carter was just that, a distraction. Yet the more he tried to ignore it, the harder it became. One evening, at a high-profile event for the company, Adrian brought a date, a stunning model with a perfect smile and an empty gaze. She laughed at all the right moments, complimented his success, and draped herself over him as if she belonged there. But as Adrian scanned the room, his eyes landed on Emma, standing quietly in the corner, talking to a colleague. She wasn't dressed in anything flashy, just a simple navy blue dress, elegant but understated. Yet somehow she stood out more than anyone else, and for the first time in his life, Adrian felt something strange, jealousy. It made no sense. She wasn't his. She wasn't supposed to matter. Yet when another man approached her, engaging her in conversation, Adrian felt an unfamiliar irritation rise within him. His date spoke, but he wasn't listening. His focus was elsewhere, and that's when it hit him. Something he never thought possible. He was falling for her. But Emma? She had no idea, and when she finally found out, her reaction would change everything. Adrian couldn't shake the feeling that had settled deep inside him. It was new, unsettling, and completely unexpected. Emma wasn't supposed to be on his mind. Yet, here he was, watching her from across the room, feeling something dangerously close to longing. The night continued, but Adrian barely heard the conversations around him. His date clung to his arm, laughing at something he hadn't even registered. His attention was elsewhere, on Emma. On the way she smiled at the man she was speaking to, on the way her eyes lit up, on the way she looked happy. And for the first time in his life, Adrian Kingston felt a pang of something he had never allowed himself to feel before. Regret. He had spent years treating Emma as if she were invisible. He had barked orders, dismissed her efforts, and never once thought about what it must have been like for her to work under someone so cold. And now, just as he was beginning to see her for who she truly was, he realized something terrifying. She was slipping away. The realization hit him harder than he expected. The next morning at the office, Adrian was different. He didn't bark. Orders. He didn't throw files onto her desk without a word. Instead, he watched her carefully, searching for something, anything that might tell him what she thought of him. But Emma was the same as always, polite, professional, distant. It was as if nothing had changed, except for him. Days passed, and Adrian couldn't shake the feeling that he had ruined any chance of ever making things right. Until one evening, when he found himself standing outside her office, hesitating. He had never hesitated before, but this wasn't a business deal. This wasn't a contract negotiation. This was Emma. Taking a deep breath, he knocked. She looked up, surprised. "Mr. Kingston?" He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "Adrian," he corrected. "Just Adrian." Emma frowned, clearly confused. "Is something wrong?" Everything was wrong. He had spent years mistreating the one person who had been loyal to him, the one person who had stood by his side even when he didn't deserve it. And now, he didn't know how to fix it. "I wanted to talk to you," he admitted, his voice quieter than usual. "About us," Emma blinked. "Us?" He ran a hand through his hair, suddenly feeling out of his depth. "I've been a terrible boss and a terrible person, and I just—" He exhaled sharply. "I don't know when it happened, But I see things differently now. I see you differently. Emma studied him for a long moment, and then, to his surprise, she smiled. It wasn't the polite, professional smile she always gave him. It was something softer. I know, she said simply. Adrian frowned. You know? Emma nodded. I've seen the way you've changed, the way you've been looking at me. I just didn't know if you were ready to admit it. His chest tightened. And now that I have? Emma let out a small breath as if she had been holding it in for a while. Then, with a look he had never seen before, one filled with warmth and something he desperately hoped was affection, she said, Then maybe it's not too late after all. Adrian had spent years building walls around his heart, but in that moment, as Emma looked at him with something close to forgiveness, he realized that some walls weren't meant to last forever, and for the first time in his life, Adrian Kingston wasn't afraid to let someone in.